Hardcore Classic WoW isn't for the faint of heart. One wrong pull, one missed cooldown, and everything just ends in tragedy. But don't worry, today we are going to talk about my survival guide for World of Warcraft Hardcore Classic. I want to first explore the number one rule that I've experienced is you really shouldn't rush it. You should take your time leveling. I know everyone, especially with the fresh servers, they're really hyped up about getting to 60 quick. It's not going to serve you unless you're a top tier player. But even Ampy just recently had a disconnect. It's never worth rushing. It's always worth taking your time and just being careful. Now, of course, with Ampy's death, there's really nothing that he could have done with it because it was a disconnect or it was a crash, whatever it was at the time. But still, the point still stands. If you rush, you're going to make mistakes. And kind of to add on to this point, never tilt yourself. So if you die and you're like, shit, I'm going to rush and get myself right back to where I needed to be, that might spell disaster. So just be careful. My best advice would be level backup alts, have some alts building rested that you can go and play on when your main alt dies and kind of work it from there. So again, try to avoid those careless mistakes, try to avoid any rushing because you don't want to die, right? So just be safe and take your time with it. The next tip is to just generally always have an escape plan. So I'm looking at like a lot of the caves in Westfall, or if you're doing some of the Horde quests, you're worried about like maybe the Yetis, whatever it may be, any sort of the Silver Pine Forest caves or anything. I probably wouldn't go in there unless one, I'm clearing the cave myself so I know what the respawn rate is, and two, I'm always going to make sure that I have some way to get away. So if you're a rogue, you have to have sprint up. If you're a mage, have blink, paladin, bubble. You get the drift. Just make sure that you have some kind of escape plan to get out of the cave that you're in. Now, when I say cave, that doesn't always mean a literal cave. Sometimes an out in the world experience can be considered a cave. So I'm looking at some of the more like densely populated elite zones, or perhaps up north of Red Ridge Mountains, somewhere along those lines. And also too, Stone Talon, where all those elementals are, just be careful of that whole zone. I would consider that cave dangerous. Next is make sure that you have everything prepared, whether that be your food buffs, so make sure you're fishing and you're cooking. Make sure that you have all of your elixirs, potions. I cannot describe how many times a healing potion, a mana potion, or a swiftness potion has saved my life. So just make sure that you have those at the ready and you have everything that you need before heading out on your adventures. Another tip is to just, in general, start learning something about mob pathing mechanics. This is probably where I feel like I excel because I have a lot of experience tanking. So if you have some experience tanking, you probably know all of the tricks that I'm going to tell you now. In general, don't hit a mob when you're trying to run away. You're just going to leash it further. You want to make sure that you're either strafing back and forth and backing up so they avoid casting. Or LOSing casters, and I'm looking primarily at like the Defias Pillagers, which are probably one of the most dangerous early casters in the game, other than maybe the Geomancers, at least for Alliance side. So I'm looking at all those low-level casters that could potentially cause problems, so just make sure you're LOSing when you can. Use your stuns pretty liberally. Just make sure that you're getting hit with as little magic damage as possible, especially at the lower levels. Magic just scales so hard for an NPC. And this kind of leads into the next point, is know your enemy. And mainly this is maybe more for like a boss / elite mechanic. You should just in general know what most bosses or what most elites might do to you. So you're just making sure that you're aware before getting in so you're not having any surprises. So for example, the dragon in Sunken Temple will generally sleep, and usually sleep the tank, so somebody needs to be ready at that point to survive, and that could cause a lot of deaths. There could be a situation where you're in dead mines, and this is probably something that a lot of people are going to be facing with Fresh, is you're in dead mines and you're getting up to Mr. Smite, you're not killing the ads, and then all of a sudden Mr. Smite is beating on your tank for 3 seconds while in stun lock. Not really the greatest situation, so just make sure that you do a light prep and understand all the mobs that you might encounter before heading into a dungeon or an elite quest. This next tip is not negotiable. Professions are going to save your life. Whether that's engineering, and specifically for me, engineering is probably the best bet. Target dummies and bombs are just inexplainable in terms of how much they add to your gameplay, especially if you're someone like a paladin and you need like range damage, or if you pull too many mobs and you have your target dummies, especially in dungeons when something happens and you all of a sudden aggro the whole dungeon. It gives you just those few seconds to get ahead of the mob pack and survive with your life. I've heard some arguments that for some self-bound people, they see the argument of having alchemy as their main profession. I really don't. There's just so much that you get from engineering, so many life-saving capabilities, that I don't know that you can truly match it. I do understand the argument of having elixirs as a self-found, but still having the the target dummies and the bombs, I just don't think any profession can beat that. So I'd recommend it for anyone, including self-found. It definitely is the top tier profession. And then obviously second to that in terms of survivability is going to be your first aid. Make sure you have your first aid leveled up and you're often keeping that topped up just in case, and make sure you have some bandages because you never know when you're going to need them. So I kind of talked about this a little bit before about understanding aggro, and the one thing that I want to cover here is the difference between social aggro and single aggro. So when you pull one mob that's in a pack, let's say a pack of 3, and you pull that one mob with a single ability, it's going to gather everyone in that pack and they're all going to come for you. And as you hit that one mob, the 2 other mobs that are with it aren't going to fall behind as they do in retail. They're going to continue being leashed with that initial pack until you hit everyone with an AoE, and then you can just single target the one mob that you want to keep. However, you just should be aware of this because I see far too many people just hit the one mob, keep running away, and expect the other 2 mobs to drop off. That's never going to happen. So just be careful when you're pulling groups that you're pulling them either with an AoE spell or you're able to burn one down, run away, come back, re-engage when you're at a little bit higher of health. So just be aware of that, and I'd practice a little bit of, kind of breaking that social aggro. So you could break that with something like a demo shout if you're a warrior or a blizzard or arcane explosion, whatever AoE you might have on hand. Finally is add-ons. I can't describe how big this is. I died so many times just due to elites coming out of the woodwork. There was one bullshit death, which I really wish I still had the recording. I was in Loch Modan, and I was just running through the trees, and my camera angle was weird, and the mobs didn't phase in until like a second before I passed through the trees, so I didn't actually see them. And if I had an add-on like Unit Scan Hardcore or Safeguard, it absolutely would have saved me in that moment. So just make sure that you have a couple of those key add-ons. The ones that I'd recommend is in this list right here on screen, but that's Unit Scan Hardcore. It's going to be Safeguard, Deathlog, so you can see the heat map, and then your general add-ons. But those are the add-ons that I would recommend, at least for this. And that's it. I know this is a little bit basic for some of you hardcore veterans, but I know there's a lot of non-hardcore people playing as of the fresh servers. I've already been seeing a lot of deaths, and you know what? Even with this guide, I'm not immune to those deaths. Well, that's it from me. If you want more hardcore or WoW content in general, go ahead and give me a subscribe. Otherwise, I will catch you in the next video.